Looks like we're good to go now. So like I was saying, you can find stuff like total expenditures as well. For the state as a whole, was just over $1.1 billion. And as we'll see on the next slide, well, next two slides. This slide is if you have a question about profile, Ray Gray is your best contact. He works with the districts to put them together and compile all the information. So any specific questions for those is best go to Mr. Ray Gray. He's a really sweet guy. Really awesome if you have not met him. I thought it was my next slide. It's not. We'll get to it. So within the FCE general instructions or the transportation instructions, and one thing in there is Appendix A, which is the schedule of dates. Y'all have probably been blasted by me, reminding y'all to send the letters based off those dates. These dates are subject to change except for the current year. So like we have the dates for 2023, 24. They could possibly change between now and time we get there. The only ones that are set in stone are the ones for the current year. Hopefully we'll have a memorandum out to y'all in the next month or so with the dates for 21, 22. So like I was saying, expenditures, here we can see, total expenditures for the state was close to $1.1 billion. And the legislative appropriated for last year just $450 million. So not even quite 50%. So that's why it's super important that we do correctly report all students who are fundable through the FEFP in the correct category because it does change the calculation how much funds you are earning for your district. So how does the formula work? It looks super complicated, but if you break it down, it's not so bad. So it funds the ESE allocation kids first and then funds base second. And it funds the base based off of a pro rata formula of how many kids you in your district compared to the entire state. But we do have a few factors we have to use first. We have the average bus occupancy factor, the reality index, and the FPLI index. And we'll get more into those in a little bit. So kids who are fundable. Kids who are normal FEFP students, they are fundable. But an important thing to note is if they have to ride the buses. I know that sounds crazy, but students do get reported who don't actually ride the buses. They do have to be on the bus and do have to be signed off by the bus operator. And they have to be in an approved conveyance according to Florida statute. Not just any kid coming in a random car can be counted for funding. So there's two main components within the formula for transportation. There's the base transportation allocation and the ESE transportation allocation. As we said earlier, the ESE transportation allocation is fully funded first. So we make sure that all the funds that ESE kids earn get fully funded since they do have the most needs of students to be able to get the education, get the education they deserve. Then with all remaining funds, we fund the base transportation allocation. We still use the same factors, the reality index, the average bus occupancy, and the FPI index, but unfortunately, there's not usually enough within the appropriation to fully fund every student for the amount that we could. So we have to kind of do on a pro rata share based upon each district's share of total students to the state. So the factors, the first one's the FPI index. This is basically just a representative of the cost of living. We all know there's different places to cost living more. Live in New York City is a lot more expensive to live in, say, Tallahassee, where I'm from. Now, obviously, we don't fund New York City, but we could look at Miami. It's more expensive in Miami than in Tallahassee. These aren't huge changes, just as a FYI, it ranges from 0.9 to 1.1, so just a 10% swing either way. The next one is the reality index. This is kind of similar to FPLI, but specifically based upon populations. Population isn't the only driver for a cost of living. You could be really rural and still be super expensive to live there. But if there's a higher population of students, it's much easier for one bus to pick up a whole bunch on one route than for someone who has to drive all around the district to gather the students up, which then leads into average bus occupancy. So as we can see, they're all kind of intertwined and linked. Average bus occupancy rewards efficiency in buses. So if you had a district just sending buses out, had 2 kids in each bus, this formula is going to kind of dock them. And by dock them, it's still just that down to 0.9 if you're at the very lowest of all the districts. So it's not a huge dock. Obviously, the smaller districts have to do to be able to get the students to the school. So in 2019, we can see the average bus occupancy range from 110 to 39. So kind of a wide range there. So that's why this is a factor in there, because we do want to encourage people to try to I don't want to say cram the buses full, but fully utilize that bus and all that it can do. So how do we get the average bus occupancy? It's super simple. We take our October survey and February survey students, average them together, take how many buses we use to transport those kids, average them together, and then just divide those two together, and we get our average bus occupancy. Super simple. It's not crazy how to figure it out. So if you want to figure out around what yours was, if you know the state max, so you can kind of see where you fall in that group. If you know the max is 110 and the lowest is 39, and you're at 74, you're in the middle. You're doing good. Some districts are going to be a little higher. It could be because they're more dense populated areas, but you're not doing bad. That's perfectly good. So kind of moving into individual pieces of the formula based off ESE and base. So ESE, like I said, gets funded first. To be funded, they do have to be in buses to get that extra additional allocation for ESE. As opposed to a base transportation student. That's probably one of the most important things to note. In addition to, it must be on their IEP that they need special transportation services. That's what gets missed a lot and gets hit in audits a lot, is that we report for ESE because they are an ESE student, but the IEP does not specifically say they need ESE related transportation services. So the auditors dock the districts for that. And I see that all the time. A lot of times it can be appealed and changed if you can show that that should have been that way. But I do see that very commonly in the audits, but that is docked. So when does this happen? We take the surveys 4 times a year, so I'm sure y'all all very well aware. We are coming up on survey 1 for the brand new 2021-22 year. I believe it starts in 2 weeks. I think it's in 2 weeks it starts. And then survey 2 is in October, survey 3 is in February, and survey 4 is in June. Oftentimes, survey 2 is just referred to as the October survey, and survey 3 is the February survey. Survey 1 and 4 aren't really referred to as much because there's not very much implication for those as far as transportation is going. And we'll get a little bit more into who can be counted for survey 1 and 4 later on in the presentation. These surveys we use this information from the surveys to do the calculations. So we do 4 calculations in every fiscal year. The first one is done technically done in the prior year during the legislative session. This is the first calculation. It's all with prior year data. It doesn't have any of the actual survey data. So we've already done one transportation calculation for the 21-22 school year. And it was in the 21-22 FEFP conference report. It was just all prior year data. And for this year, it was super weird. As we all know, last year was a challenging year for all of us, especially transporting students and all the things we had to do for that. So they actually used 1920 data for that calculation. Second calculation, this is where we finally start to use actual data. When we do the second calculation, this is in the 3rd FEFP calculation that comes out in early January. I know it sounds odd, 3rd FEFP, but 2nd transportation calculation. The reason for that is real quickly, in the 2nd FEFP calculation, all we're really doing is just adjusting the state and local share of funds, not really changing how much funding is going to each district. It's just who's paying for it. So when we do the 3rd calculation, we do the 2nd calculation, transportation calculation, which uses the survey 2 and survey 1 results. Survey 2 is the biggest driver here, because as you can see, we duplicated the fund for the February survey because we don't have that data yet. And survey 2 and survey 3 are the 2 biggest portions of students in the calculation. Survey 1 and survey 4 do have some students, but it's a lot smaller share of 2 and 3. So that's why accurate reporting is super important, because if you're under or over reporting, it's going to get doubled in the 2nd calculation because we do duplicate that data for the February survey in the 2nd calculation. 3rd calculation, however, we have the February survey. So now we have that actual data. The only data at this point that we're estimating is the June survey. So that's pretty close to what the final is going to look like. And the final calculation, which gets done after the whole school year is over, because the June survey happens later in June and we don't have the information. And the close of amendment window this year is August 15th. Yeah, August 15th. So it won't be till after then that we even do the calculation for it. So the next, I think, dozen or so slides are the actual math of how we do the calculation for each individual piece within the transportation calculation. It's been a fun game. We kind of how many times I say calculation in this presentation. So this is kind of an overview of the allocation factors, the base and ESE transportation allocation factors. The next three slides will look almost the same. The next one will look exactly the same because it's very similar. There's one small difference is what I'm going to focus on when we get to the ESE one. So we'll do the base first. To get the base allocation students, we take your adjusted July students, your adjusted October students, adjusted February students, and adjusted June students, add them all together. Super simple. And I use the word adjusted because it's not a straight student count. If you have a student who, let's say in October survey, only rides the bus for 30 days, and if, let's say you have a normal 90-day period for that survey, it's not an 88 or 92, it's just a normal 90-day period. They wouldn't count as a whole student because they weren't utilizing the services for the entire time. Now that's a lot more complicated. I don't really deal too much on that side. That's more Teresa Sanko and Christy Ham who deals more with that directly. That's why we use the word adjusted, because it's not a direct correlation between students on buses and your adjusted student count. So we then take our adjusted base students, multiply it times the FPLI, the average bus occupancy, and the reality index. And this gives us our base allocation factor. The base allocation factor and the ESE transportation allocation factor are the two driving factors in the calculation. So this is a super important number, but it's not that hard to get out of. Now, getting the FPLI and getting the average bus occupancy and reality index, especially the reality index, is a little bit more complicated. But the individual pieces overall are not complicated and hard to understand. Now, ESE, let's look how this is different. So we still take our adjusted July students, our ESE October, our ESE February, and our ESE June, add them together. This time we multiply them as a factor of 1.8. So an ESE student right off the bat is financially worth almost twice as much as a base student. So again, super important that if these kids are ESE kids and they should fall in that category, to correctly report them as ESE students. Because not only do they get fully funded first, they're also worth a lot because they oftentimes can cost more to transport because they do need special services. And that's perfectly fine. That's what we want. We want to help out everyone as much as possible. So importance of correctly reporting them. Just like with the base allocation factor, we take our adjusted weighted ESE students, multiply them times FBLI, the average bus occupancy you may see as ABO, and the reality index to get us our ESE allocation factor. We then take our ESE allocation factor times the appropriated funds per student to get our district ESE allocated allocation. We then take our state allocation minus our state ESE allocation, and that gives us our total state-based allocation. So what that means is, like I've said a few times, we see how much is the maximum an ESE student can earn and say, all right, you have this max. Our remaining amount for the rest of transportation is this 394 million as an example. That's what we will spread among all the base riders. So we talk about ESE, base. Now what's it look like as far as membership categories? So everyone is going to fall under base rider except for category L. Category L are those individuals with disability education. Pre-K through grade 12. Pre-K will be a little different. We'll get to that next slide. There's only certain pre-K kids who can count for transportation funding. Category F is teenage parents and infants. G is hazardous walk-in. M is all other fundable FEFP students. Not all other students, just all FEFP fundable students. N is all riders who are not fundable in the FEFP. We see a lot of these in survey 1 and 4 because only very few students are eligible to receive funding in survey 1 and 4. So pre-K, for a pre-K student to receive transportation funding, there's only two ways. One, they're a student with disability, and they fall under that act and rule. or they're a child of a teenage parent enrolled in a teenage parent program. If they are not in either two of those categories, they do not qualify for transportation funding under the FEFP. There are other programs that do provide funding for those kids, but through the FEFP, those are the only two ways to earn funds for those students. Hazardous walking. This is for your K through 5, your elementary students who say live within 2 miles of the school, but it's a dangerous walk. For whatever reason, it's a dangerous walk. There's certain factors you have to meet to be considered a hazardous walker. But it's just for K through 5, except as we can see, unless the elementary school serves grade 6. So it doesn't mean a school who only serves 6 through 8, say, they're not eligible. If a school serves K through 6, that 6th grader is eligible to be counted as a hazardous walker. One important thing to note is there's no longer a hazardous walking database. It's been gone long before I got here even, but it's gone. So it is up to the district to be able to prove when you're audited that student is indeed a hazardous walker and you've done all the proper steps to show that they are a hazardous walker. Otherwise, I see it a lot as well with the audits. I'm involved with the audits quite a bit. The auditor will go in and say, all right, well, they're not a hazardous walker actually, and they're not actually an eligible student. So therefore you just lost complete funding for that student. So make sure you do document and keep all retention documents. It's very important because the auditors, they don't mean to be harsh. It's just their job. Sadly, they have to deliver the bad news to everyone. So speaking of auditors, survey, ridership surveys. So to be counted as a rider, you have to have proof that that kid was on the bus, because you can't just say, hey, we have 30 kids and they don't exist. You have to have proof they were on the bus. The most common way of that proof is the bus operator worksheet, which has all the information the auditor would need to prove that that kid is there. One of the most important things is it has to be signed by the driver. An unsigned document oftentimes will create lots of issues, and the auditors will tend to say it doesn't count, it's unsigned. We don't know if it's actually from that time period or if it came after. Now, if a kid is sick during survey week, that doesn't mean that you don't get to count them as a rider. You do have the 6 days prior as well to show that they are a transportation rider. So there's a whole big time span. Common thing I hear is, well, we have 50 kids who were out this week, and it was a big thing this last year, which is why the transportation calculation got frozen. And this last year was obviously very different. But pre-COVID-19, a lot of people would say, well, we didn't have time. They were out sick with parents. You do have the 6 days prior and the whole survey week. So it is a very long period. If there are other exceptions, reach out to the transportation office and work with them. But there's a long period that you are able to utilize. So like I said, the bus operator worksheet, this is a sample kind of information of what should be included on there as a minimum, just to show the auditors they have all the correct information for the students on that bus. So, things like bus number, vehicle category, days in term, what fiscal year it is, simple things like that oftentimes do get missed. So they do need to be neat and legible. I get it's hard, especially you're on the road, you're picking up kids, you're trying to mark that kid's there and it looks awful. So if you need to go back in at the end of the day or end of the week and kind of clean it up a little bit, that's fine. Sometimes people are, taking notes on a napkin. I've seen that before. That's a fun one. And they need to be reviewed, verified, and signed by a supervisor, as well as the signature of the actual bus driver as well. Maintain the hard copies. You can also have electronic copies, but have those hard copies just in case the goes, actually, I want to see the original copy. That way you have it and it's there. Worst case, you have a box that's garbage, you can throw it out in however many years you don't need it anymore. But hold on to at least get past that auditing period. Here's what a sample ridership data collection form has. The transportation office can help provide you with one of these as well if you need one. I know they always like to help districts in collecting the correct information because it helps their job as well. So if you need to reach out to get one, you want to update yours, transportation office is more than willing to help you do that and get all the correct information you need on it. So there are certain conveyances that are approved means of transportation for students. So we have buses, passenger cars, privately owned motor vehicle or boats. The boats is a fun one for me when I came into this. I'm like, boats, that doesn't make any sense. Unless you live in Monroe County and you live in the Keys, then you might need a boat to get to school. That was all. I was like, it made no sense to me at first till my boss, till Josh explained it to me. He's like, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then general purpose transportation. So you take the city bus or the train. So here's a little bit of information about things you might need to know for general purpose transportation. You need to keep a list of who uses it. Do maintain that. And also basically who claim it, and private cars as well. Basically, the moral of the story is you can't over document and keep too much documentation. I know that sounds tedious and awful, but I have seen very large financial impacts come from not maintaining documents. Very large. And as we saw, transportation is expensive. It was 1.1 billion to state, and the FEFP only funded 450 million last year. So that's a huge amount. So every dollar counts. So do maintain those records. I know it seems tedious, but it really is helping out education of students because every dollar earned is a dollar can go towards another piece of their education in the system. So audits. I've been talking about audits this whole time, and that's probably my underlying theme more so just because I am so involved in the audit process. I do see the effects it has and the time it takes when you have to go back. We've been working with one school, they will remain unnamed, for the past 6-7 months trying to resolve some issues they had, not on the transportation side, theirs was on FTE side, but they spent so many man hours trying to prove this and show certain stuff that they had just kept the documentation like they're supposed to from the beginning. It would have saved them more time in the long run. So I know it could seem like it might save 5 minutes here or 20 minutes here to not do it. But if you get audited that year and it comes up, it's going to spend way more time than that trying to do that. So please maintain all documents. Don't have students duplicated. Don't count them more than once. Things like that. That's also common. And mistakes happen. Everyone gets it. Mistakes happen. All we can do is our best. Summer school. So who's eligible for summer school? There are 2 categories of students eligible. One are DJJ kids who are not living on residence. They are allowed to receive funding through the FEFP transportation. So not very many there at all. Most summer DJJ kids do live at the facility, but there are exceptions. And they are entitled to receive funding for transportation to their DJJ facility. ESE kids whose IEP states that they need extended school year services and transportation can get funded. If it just says they need extended school year services and doesn't mention transportation, it cannot be funded. It has to specifically state in transportation. That's very important. I know it's always a very contentious issue of what the IEP needs to say and what it should say. So if you're getting told it needs to be one way and the IEP doesn't state it, I would work with that office to see, okay, well, we need to fix their IEP. Their IEP is wrong in this case if they do need it. Sometimes it's just a miscommunication between the office who does the IEPs and the transportation office on what's actually needed. All other students are reported under category N, non-eligible. We won't earn funding from them, but we can still track how many we are transporting during that period. So this runs in July and June at summer school. I know this year I'm not really involved in the actual school system besides the funding part of it, which sounds odd. There's been a huge uptick in summer school this year, which is kind of to be expected. I have heard lots of learning losses. So I would presume there's probably been an uptick in transportation for their summer school students as well this year. So please work with the district FT administrator. If you have an issue with the transportation week not falling during summer school, if you need to get that adjusted. So if summer school is out 1 week and that's when your survey week should be, work with the FT administrator to get it changed and get it adjusted so you can still count the students who should be earning for that. So after each survey, we do some reviews, just to kind of look at your data compared to past year data, or if we do the February survey, kind of look at compared to October survey to see if there's any abnormalities. Our general rule of thumb is 5%, just because we don't want to have to call you about every little difference that we think might be wrong. Because again, we're just looking at data. We're not actually the folks transporting kids. But if we do see a big variance, we will contact you just to ask and see if it's correct. Sometimes it's just you haven't updated the system yet. You realize there's an error, but sometimes we've had some big catches. There was one time we saw, like, I think it was 10, it was on 10% lower, and we asked, and they thought they had transmitted some data, and they hadn't. So we try to do that for y'all, just kind of help out a little bit. Again, 5% is still a large amount. If it's less than that, we're probably not going to look at it unless it looks odd. And that sounds weird. Looks odd, but when you see it in the formulas, you're like, oh, that something's odd there. You can kind of just see it. But 5% is our general rule of thumb. We're going to reach out and contact you about it. It might be me, it might be Josh, it might be the EIS office. It kind of depends on who catches it at what point in the process. So there kind of a little more information, the exact same thing I just said. It helps us, stay consistent in our reporting, and stay accountable to the legislature and our leadership at FLDOE. So a few resources for y'all right before we get the question answered. You go to FLDOE.org/transportation. That's going to take you to the transportation profiles if you're interested to see all the information you could possibly want to know about your specific district's transportation, or if you want to see the state's overall transportation information, you can see the overall transportation profile. My office funding and reporting, specifically funding, if you go to FLDOE.org/FEFP, you can find information there, including the transportation general instructions, which are inside of the FTE general instructions. They used to be separate, they're not combined, and then they're together. And then there's also EIS's address as well. Some emails and phone numbers for you. I'll leave this slide up here just so y'all can have, if you'll write down numbers or emails, whatever you want. Robert Manspeaker, he's a great guy. If you haven't talked to him, he's great. I love him. He's in charge of the transportation office. Makes a delicious cheesecake. As a random side note, if you ever get offered a piece of his cheesecake, take it. It's delicious. Super nice guy, super helpful. He will do his best for you. Teresa Sanko, she works in EIS. She's been there, I don't know how longer than I have. She's super smart. She knows all the ins and outs of how these kids should be reported, how they are reported, and how they're not reported. So if it's from a reporting aspect, she's your best contact. If it's about the calculation itself or about funding related to the calculation, I'm your guy. Contact me. If I can't get it, I will be able to find out who can get the answer for you. Generally, if you contact me, I can still find out who's supposed to get the answer for you. If you're not sure who you should contact, you can contact me and I can point you in the correct direction if I can't help you myself. So with that, I will open up to y'all if you have any questions at all.
And this is the first time you've ever been cited for this. And you said on one of your slides that the bus ridership rosters are signed by the driver and date. Doesn't say what the date has to be. The auditor said the bus driver may have gotten that roster and pre-signed the date of it and then filled it out for the 11 days. So she will not accept any ridership that is after the date that that driver signed that roster. It's going to be a big time.
Yes. On that one, if you'll do me a favor and send me an email, and just kind of say that way I can put it on. I'm trying to think, I've seen that before. So just to kind of understand correctly for myself, it was signed on, say, I'm just gonna pick random dates of the year, say 5/14, since it was the middle of the survey week, and the auditor is not gonna accept any ridership on, say, 5/15 and 5/16. Okay, yeah, send that one to me.
We don't have an official finding yet.
Yeah.
It was just a different audit that section that has.
Gotcha. Yeah, send that one to me, and just kind of say it's not an official finding yet. You've had this issue, you're trying to work through it. If there's anything we can do, or if we know an answer. I don't know if I've seen that come up in an audit where it's been like that. I've seen where it's been completely missing, or they counted students, say 2 weeks after survey week that weren't approved, but during actual survey week, yeah, send me that in email and I'll have to run that up, see if I can get an entry yet, but definitely send that one to me because that one's an interesting one.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and we have that finding.
You have that one too?
And it's an official finding for us. And we do plan to appeal that.
In what year's yours in?
We just finished it for the 1920.
For the 1920? Okay, I wonder if that was something they were specifically looking for in that year for some reason then.
We were told that it's a new interpretation of the rule.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Well, I have not heard that interpretation. So send me an email as well. And that way I can get with Josh and we can talk through that. And you know, we might not have any guidance. It depends how they want to take it. But I'll try to get you an answer, you know, if you should definitely appeal or stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay.
But we will go through that appeal process. 1920 obviously is a little bit ways off, but yes. So keep all your records from that year, my recommendation. She had a question over there.
On your slide about summer school bus eligibility, you mentioned it says that ESC students need the ESY and the transportation, but it says they could be either weighted or unweighted. Why would the ESC students be unweighted? What's the same stuff? Just like a varsity.
So I'm not super familiar with that specific line of it. Like I said, I usually work just more on the funding side, not who goes in what, but that sounds right. Any other questions? Fun or serious? All right, well, hopefully y'all came away with something new today. Hopefully I didn't just put y'all to sleep talking about math and the calculation. Hopefully it was a little more exciting. I will be presenting tomorrow on the actual FEFP calculation, which is to me a lot more exciting. It's what I work in daily to do. This is part of it, but this is kind of a little bit outside my expertise. FEFP is definitely my bread and butter. So hopefully if you are at that one will be a little bit more exciting for y'all. I know they have 2 sessions of it right back to back in case you're in something else as well. So once again, thank y'all so much for being a great audience today. I really appreciate it. Good job. So let me just stop this. And then any